Today's presentation, Living Wisely as Humanists, presented by our own Red Bank Humanist member, Lee Beaumont. Lee graduated from the Lehigh University. He received his master's degree in electrical engineering from Purdue University. He has worked in the data communications product development industry for over 30 years. He's trained as an electrical engineer, a computer scientist, a quality technologist, and a new product developer. He is a systems thinker who is constantly curious about how the world works. He was head of the product realization process improvement department at AT&T. He has 28 years experience in research and development with AT&T and Bell Laboratories, including 8 years with AT&T, followed by 5 years with Lucent Technologies. He retired from Lucent and Alcatel-Lucent, where he was responsible for specification and verification of internet content delivery products. This led to the co-authoring of a book, Content Networking. He retired after 30 years with Lucent Technologies. He is presently studying emotional competency and preparing to write a book based on his recent work. He is an author, a husband, and a father, and a patent holder. Please welcome Leland Beaumont.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me to speak to you about seeking real good. Before beginning, I want to mention that all the material I'm presenting today is freely available online from Wikiversity. Several of the slides cite specific course titles as sources for more information, and you can go there, study it in depth, and read the extensive references. I'll also mention that because my memory is not what I wish it would be, I will be referring to notes at times. I hope this is not distracting to you. The purpose of today's talk is to persuade you that seeking real good can make the world a better place. I suspect that many of you are already seeking real good throughout your lives. Nonetheless, I hope you'll find the talk interesting and will learn some new ways to think about seeking real good, or find some new ways to explain the importance of real good to others. Are you seeking real good? Is there any better way to spend your time if you want the most out of your life? If you're a parent or a grandparent, is there a better way to pass on a good world to your children or grandchildren? Would you rather argue in favor of real bad or fake good? Do you want to live wisely? Humans have long been fascinated by two fundamental questions. What is real and what is good? Exploring these questions independently often leads to a polarization based on a false dichotomy. Scientists traditionally examine evidence in their pursuit of reality. However, their investigations may be narrowly focused, and they're sometimes accused of abandoning human values and other concepts of the good. Creative optimists, including storytellers, artists, theologians, mystics, and dreamers, often suspend reality to better imagine and convey a sense of good. Fortunately, there are reliable ways we can determine what is real and what is good, and we can have both. Investigators examine reality, face facts, evaluate evidence, seek true beliefs, explore worldviews, and know how they know. Also, we're guided towards the good by flourishing, human flourishing, focusing on what matters, living the golden rule, preserving human dignity, and upholding human rights. We'll examine the various ways we can determine what is real and what is good that we see listed here. Let's begin by asking, how tall is the Eiffel Tower, and how can we determine its height? We could ask Siri. We could look it up in Wikipedia. We could go to travel guides, and we might get reliable information. We might get a variety of answers. We could ask a friend, and depending who we ask, we might get more or less reliable information. Or we could go measure it. We could drop a string from the top. We could use a tape measure. We could use a laser measuring device. We could use transit surveyor's equipment. And we might get different answers. But what we do know is that the tower does have a height. And we know that reliable methods for determining that height will converge towards the actual height. Reliable epistemologies, reliable ways of knowing, converge on matters of fact. And when there's a lack of convergence, that casts doubt on the reliability of the methods being used. Pursuing such discrepancies can lead to important insights about the reliability of our methods. Agreeing to disagree on matters of fact is a decision to accept complacency and incoherence. You'll probably recognize this famous photo. It was taken during the Tiananmen Square protests in China in 1989. The protesters must face the fact that overwhelming military force is now being used to forcibly suppress the student-led demonstrations. At the same time, the military commanders must face the fact that the students are firmly resolved in their resistance. They all must embrace reality. We know that reality does exist, and that we do live in the real world, and that we can explore, investigate, examine, observe, measure, and probe that real world. You and I and everyone we know or will ever meet all live in the same universe, and the most certain of all propositions and the most certain of all basic principles is that contradictory propositions are not true simultaneously. It's important to distinguish among matters of fact, matters of controversy, or matters of preference when describing and discussing reality and uncertainty. Statements can be classified into one of the following three types. Matters of fact can be assessed and verified through the correct use of evidence gathering and reasoning. A correct statement can be made with conviction. These statements declare what is, and careful researchers agree on the answers. Differences are best resolved through research. Ask an expert on the topic to understand matters of fact. Matters of controversy are neither facts nor opinions. They are issues where sincere experts often disagree on the best answer or the best course of action. These statements propose what ought to be, or they ask about a topic that's not yet fully and carefully explored or researched. Differences are best explored through dialogue. You can ask an expert, you can ask a philosopher in this case, or a Supreme Court justice to get some insights on matters of controversy. With matters of taste or preference or opinion, any claim is acceptable because the statement depends only on the preferences of the person making it. Reasonable people know there is no correct answer. Have fun and enjoy the differences. Fake news attempts to mix these up and present facts as if they're controversy, and controversy as if they are facts. Our language provides many words to describe degrees of uncertainty. It's good to choose carefully among these words as you express uncertainty. Facts correspond with reality. I know the Eiffel Tower is 300 meters tall and that the Earth is roughly spherical. I believe incarceration rates in the United States are too high. My opinion is that Rod Stewart is the best singer performing today. I doubt that Noah was 500 years old when he became a father, and I might feel hungry, tired, angry, or even a little nervous here. Whatever is used to dismiss a previous statement, express indifference, and to end the conversation. It's good to persevere and ask, what do you mean? The words shown here are often misused in ploys intended to shut down dialogue. For example, after you make some statement of fact, an obscurist might respond with, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. You can then confidently respond with, this is not about how I feel. It's about facts. It's about how the world really is. And the facts are clear that the Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old. Go learn the facts. We all live on planet Earth. Because we all live on the same Earth, in the same universe, reliable knowledge about our world must converge. toward a consistent description of that world. Every phenomenon we observe must fit into a single coherent and integrated description of our universe. Because we all live in the same universe, as we continue to examine our universe more and more closely, the set of facts about our universe we can agree on continues to grow larger. Our common ground increases, and we become less polarized. Reliable epistemologies, ways of knowing, increase our shared common knowledge. And reality is our shared common ground. It's good to resolve disagreements by examining reality more closely and more carefully. Each piece of evidence is one piece of some larger puzzle. It's our responsibility to determine what puzzle the evidence belongs to, how it fits into that puzzle, what portion of the reality puzzle it represents, and what insights it reveals. As we encounter evidence, we need to ask, what does this evidence convey about reality? Is the information being conveyed true? Does it tell me more about the observer or what is being observed? How representative is this? To what extent can I draw a more general conclusion from this data point? For example, I've lived on this earth for many years and I've traveled to many places. Wherever I go, the earth seems flat and stationary. However, there are those who will say that the earth is round and spinning very fast. How can this be? What should I believe? Evaluating evidence is difficult. How do we best evaluate evidence? Reality is vast, complex, and dynamic. And despite ongoing exploration, discovery, and research efforts, the total collection of all existing evidence represents only a small fraction of our universe. For evidence to be readily available, it has to appear in some form, in some place that is reasonably accessible. Accessible repositories of evidence are finite, and they're necessarily curated. Someone or something selects what's contained in each collection and what is omitted. Censorship, in many forms, presents access to various evidence. When we are young, much of what we learn is based on evidence selected for us by others. Cultural influences determine the languages we learn, the customs we're taught, the traditions we uphold, and the behaviors we observe, what is taught in schools, the ethics that are espoused and practiced, and the ideologies we value. As we get older, we have more opportunities to select evidence we study. A personality trait called openness to experience becomes important. Each of us has some approach to discovery, exploration, study, learning, inquiry, assessment, and verification. Together, these can be called our research methods. Our approaches will determine what questions we choose to explore, what evidence we seek out, how gullible or skeptical we are regarding various forms of evidence, what we decide is true and false, and what we choose to believe or reject. A recursive or a positive feedback loop exists between our current beliefs and our confirmation biases that creates and sustains our worldviews. In each such case, new evidence bears the burden of overcoming presently held beliefs. We'll explore this in more depth a bit later. This diagram illustrates how we can seek true beliefs and become excellent in our quest for knowledge. Reality does exist. If you doubt this, perhaps a slap in the face would be an effective reminder. True beliefs are beliefs that correspond to reality. The intellectual virtues are motivations towards these true beliefs. And our motivations draw on various skills. Those skills are a variety of techniques, methods, and practices, such as the ability to read or care in making observations. These skills in turn draw on our natural faculties. These are our natural abilities such as eyesight and memory. Attaining true beliefs is as much a matter of will as it is of skill. We choose our beliefs, and we can decide to choose true beliefs. In fact, we have a moral obligation to choose true beliefs, and we can embrace reality as our common ground. The intellectual virtues are a variety of motivations towards true beliefs. Let's take a look at them. Love of knowledge is the motivation to gain and understand important information. Firmness is the motivation to base our beliefs on a deep understanding of evidence. Galileo was firm and the Pope was rigid. Galileo understood the evidence that he saw that led him to the conclusion that the Earth goes around the sun, and he could examine that evidence in depth and explain in detail why he came to that belief. The Pope was rigid because he could only fall back on religious doctrine, and there was really no depth to that. Courage is the motivation to overcome difficulties. We exhibit courage every day when we ask tough questions and do difficult things. Humility is the motivation to learn. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Autonomy is the motivation to choose what you believe based on your own understanding and knowing how you know. Perseverance is the motivation to dig deeper, continue investigating and researching until the evidence is clear, until anomalies are resolved, and understanding continues to deepen, and a belief can be formed with confidence. Generosity is the motivation to share results and to share credit. Lives were saved because Jonas Salk shared the polio vaccine without patenting it. Insightfulness is the motivation to imagine, discover, and understand new cause and effect relationships. Darwin gained insight when he visited the Galapagos Islands. And finally, practical wisdom is the motivation to balance and integrate all you know in developing true beliefs. It's good to explore our worldviews and to challenge our deeply embedded assumptions. Each of us holds basic assumptions about how the world works. These assumptions are formed early in our lives, and they influence how we interpret all that we experience. These worldviews represent a person's or a culture's answers to fundamental existential questions. We can explore a few worldviews as examples to better understand how this works. This is an image of the Great Chain of Being. It was drawn in 1579. And it represents a worldview that was popular among medieval Christians and is still influential today. This world represents a hierarchy that is simple, logical, powerful, and all-encompassing. It begins with God at the top. We have angels and demons, above stars and the moon, and finally we get down to kings and nobility. Kings and nobility rule over the commoners, which rules over wild animals and domestic animals. We go on with trees and other plants, and finally into a hierarchy of minerals, ending with dirt. This is a truly nifty worldview. It provides many useful features. It gives us a spirit world, omniscience and omnipotence, handy definitions of good and evil, and ready explanations for any mystery that we come across. It gives us the divine right of kings, which legitimizes nobility. We have clergy there to interpret all this for us, and of course we have respect for authority. With that, we have a legitimate aristocracy, which gives us social classes. Once we have social classes, we're ready for slavery. Slavism would be different. Slavery, racism, sexism, and rankism. This even gives us man's dominion over Earth. This worldview makes it easy for people in power to create public policy. But there's another worldview that you might hold. This is a worldview of emerging biodiversity. The diagram illustrates how all creatures on Earth, living or dead, are emerged by descent with modification from a common ancestor. It presents a bottom-up emerging model of biodiversity rather than a top-down divine design model. This diagram begins billions of years ago with the first life forms on Earth. Time runs from the outer rim, which is today, in towards the center in concentric circles. It shows how many life forms evolve over millions of years. It shows various extinction events, and you are here. Humans are at a terminal branch of this tree as it presently exists. But evolution is an ongoing process, and we don't have a clear idea of what the next billion years will bring. It's difficult to reconcile this worldview with the great chain of being worldview. This worldview is less obvious and more difficult to understand. However, this worldview is based on evidence. Worldviews create a positive feedback loop in our own minds. Consider the developing mind of a young person eager to learn about the world. The youngster asks parents, teachers, clergy, and other adults questions about how the world works as they explore our world for themselves. Adults are likely to provide answers drawn from their own worldview, and the child begins to structure their knowledge into a similar worldview. Every person edits information based on their own confirmation biases, the human tendency to select, edit, and discount information in ways that confirm existing beliefs. As a result, beliefs are formed in ways that confirm and elaborate on the existing worldview. As this process continues, beliefs strengthen the existing worldview and the confirmation bias. Also, the confirmation bias strengthens the beliefs consistent with the existing worldview, while discounting evidence that conflicts with the worldview. This forms the positive feedback loop. If the initial worldview is incorrect, if it does not correspond to reality, then the person's beliefs will continue to drift away from reality. A child who is taught the great chain of being will look around and see kings, commoners, and slaves. Clerics will use their authority to describe divinity, good, and evil. The selective evidence confirms the worldview. It's good to discover your own worldview and work to align it with reality. How do we know how we know? How do we decide what to believe? Fake news bombards us in many different forms from many different sources. We see many sources of information labeled here as raw stimuli. But somehow, from this steady stream of incoherent information, at the end of the day, we manage to decide what we believe is true, what we are unsure of, and what we regard as false. To do this, each of us uses some theory of knowledge to assess the cacophony of raw stimuli we're constantly exposed to and to decide what it is we believe. Your theory of knowledge is the set of rules you follow to decide what to believe. Since you have chosen your beliefs, you must have some theory of knowledge in some form. However, it's unlikely you've given it much thought, written it down, tested it, refined it, or applied it conscientiously to evaluating your own beliefs. We have the opportunity, and indeed the moral obligation, to create a reliable theory of knowledge that helps us know how we know. It's good to know how you know.
Yeah.
It's good to be able to recognize fallacies. Speaking of fallacies, this is Dan Quayle. He ran with George Bush in 1988 and won. He became a 44th Vice President of the United States and served from 1989 to 1993. He used the campaign slogan, "Believe me, we will win because America cannot afford to lose." Now, believe me when I tell you that this statement contains 5 logical fallacies, because it does not have any fewer. Nonetheless, Dan Quayle went on to win the election. It's good to identify logical fallacies and to challenge them. If you are conscientiously seeking what is real, you're likely to have encountered several inconsistencies with religious teaching you have been exposed to. Various religious doctrines are often internally inconsistent, conflict with other doctrines, and include factual claims that are readily falsified. For these reasons, seeking real good may require that you think beyond theism. Welcome, humanists. Let's look at some matters of fact. How tall is the Eiffel Tower? 300 meters. What shape is the Earth? It's nearly spherical, and we hope that the flat earthers are listening. How old is the Earth? It's approximately 4.5 billion years old, and we hope that the fundamentalists are listening. Where was Barack Obama born? He was born in Hawaii, and we hope that the birthers are listening. Do vaccines cause autism? No, they do not, and we hope that the vaxxers are listening. Does contraception prevent abortion? Yes, it does, and we hope that the clerics are listening. Did Trump have the largest inauguration crowd? No, and we wish that Sarah Huckabee was listening. What are the origins of biodiversity? Biological evolution explains biodiversity. It's the cause of biodiversity, and we hope that the fundamentalists are listening. Does reality exist? Yes, it does, and we hope that the mystics are listening. Does reality supersede conjecture? Yes, it does. Denial and delusion are the words we use to describe an insistence on something that's not true, despite overwhelming evidence. Is reality our common ground? Yes. We all live on the same planet, in the same universe. Reliable methods for examining reality converge towards the same result. These are matters of fact, and we can proceed confidently on the basis of these facts. These facts are not within the scope of political correctness nor cultural relativism. If political and religious leaders would simply stand up and present this slide with conviction, the world would be a better place. Together, we could all move forward towards real good. Having looked at reality, we should take a look at what is good. These are images from a TED Talk that Sam Harris gave called Science Can Answer Moral Questions. Does anyone have any difficulty deciding which image shows the preferred conditions? Would any of you volunteer to trade places with a mother facing the drought in a war zone? We can identify at least 4 criteria for deciding what is good based on the goal of increasing well-being. The first one is human flourishing, focusing on what matters to improve our well-being. It's good to live the golden rule. It's good to preserve human dignity and to protect human rights worldwide. Let's take a look at these. We flourish when we focus on what matters. What matters is human experience. What matters is well-being. The topics that matter can be organized in a progression going from surviving through thriving, recreation, success, significance, and transcendence. It's good to spend time on what matters most. The topics listed here do matter. There's 40 of them. I will not be going through them. But they're inspired by the work of Abraham Maslow, Martin Seligman, and his positive psychology work, research on well-being, and other sources. Use these topics to organize your life and set your priorities. Spend more time on what matters and less time on distractions, destructions, and trivialities. It's good to live the golden rule. The golden rule is embraced by at least 13 of the world's religions, shown in this poster. Because these various statements of the golden rule concept emerged independently, it's likely that the golden rule expresses a fundamental truth about living together as humans. On April 1st, 1961, the cover of the Saturday Evening Post featured an original painting by Norman Rockwell honoring the golden rule, traditionally stated as, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Professor Harry Gensler has dedicated much of his life and career to studying the golden rule. In his book, Ethics and the Golden Rule, published in 2013, he examines the golden rule in depth. He rephrases the golden rule, as shown here, to clarify common misunderstandings, and he addresses simplistic misunderstandings and many more subtle fallacies. With this understanding, he asks us to treat others only as you consent to being treated in the same situation. He goes on to say that the Golden Rule, with roots in a wide range of world cultures, is well suited to be a standard that different cultures can appeal to in resolving conflicts. As the world becomes more interconnected and evolves toward a single interacting global community, the need for such a common standard is becoming more urgent. It is good to treat others only as you consent to being treated in the same situation. Living the Golden Rule is an essential step in our journey towards seeking real good and attaining a global perspective. Dignity. We can improve our world by learning to preserve dignity for all people. Dignity is the quality of worth and honor intrinsic to every person. Every human is worthy simply because we exist. Dignity is our birthright. It establishes basic entitlements that form the basic boundaries of humanity. We are each born with dignity, and human rights preserve dignity. Abridging human rights is an assault on dignity that causes suffering. Preserving human rights maximizes our well-being. Don't surrender your human rights. It is good to respect and preserve dignity in yourselves and others worldwide. Today is World Human Rights Day. Happy World Human Rights Day. 69 years ago, on December 10th, 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. Eleanor Roosevelt led the effort to establish the Declaration. The Declaration arose directly from the experiences of the Second World War, and it represents the first global expression of what many people believe to be the rights to which all human beings are inherently entitled. The full text is published on the United Nations website. It's good to read that text and understand the Declaration. The Declaration consists of 30 articles, which have been elaborated in subsequent international treaties, regional human rights instruments, national constitutions, and other laws. It's good to preserve and protect human rights worldwide. Let's take a minute to look at the preamble. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples. It's good to preserve and protect human rights. These grand challenges represent the greatest obstacles to attaining universal well-being. The list is kind of long, but let's take a few minutes to let it finish. Use these grand challenges to establish priorities, just like the evening news does, and adopt a global perspective. Look beyond a tribal perspective. It's good to address these global challenges. Now we can begin to combine what is real with what is good. Narrow definitions of traditional disciplines often lead us to perceive a false dichotomy, encouraging us to choose between science and religion, or to see science and religion somehow opposed to each other. This dichotomy can be easily resolved if we consider how each activity represents good and corresponds with reality independently. Consider the area plotted here where correspondence with reality is represented on the horizontal axis, and worth or goodness or well-being is represented on the vertical axis. Genocide and other grand challenges are real, but they're not good. Utopia describes good, but it is not real. It's fun and instructive to place other items on the list. But we must recognize that neither complete correspondence with reality nor absolute good can be achieved. It's best to consider pursuit of these elusive goals as an ongoing quest. The blue arrow indicates the direction of that quest, but not its end. Examining evidence, critical inquiry, and scientific investigations assess correspondence with reality. flourishing, the golden rule, dignity, and human rights, improved well-being, and represent the good. And of course, the Red Bank Humanists really are real good. So let's take a look at the same coordinate system in a slightly different way. Wise people use this real good coordinate system to understand where their work is heading. We are familiar with the imperative to do no harm. But there's a parallel imperative having to do with reality and truth, which is to advance no falsehoods. Together, these two establish 4 quadrants. Scientists and other investigators may be examining what is real without concern for what is good. The dreamers talk about what is good, but they may be disconnected from what is real. Evil spirits are not good and they're not real. And only the sage is working in the area of real good. Use these quadrants to evaluate what is both real and good. As you listen to clergy, politicians, salespeople, and charlatans, evaluate what they are saying based on the standard of advance no falsehoods. It can open your eyes to the work we need to do before we are all seeking real good. Will we always be hampered by a schism separating what is good from what is real? Must there always be 2 distinct directions of inquiry? Is there no end to fussing with distinctions between the good and the real? In our traditional way of thinking, we consider the work of scientists and other investigators who are searching for what is real to be heading in a very different direction from the mystics and clerics who are searching for what is good. But perhaps this is an illusion, a result of our occluded view of how the world is, based on the limitations of our current understanding. Perhaps eventually we can lift the veil and see beyond this illusion, and recognize that when we fully understand what is real, when we have removed all the veils and errors, it can only be good. As we persevere in searching for what is good, it can only be useful if it is real. Our search for the good will have to become real, because we will have outgrown our fascination with unreal fantasies. Also, in searching for what is real, it is only useful if it is good. As our understanding increases, both paths converge to an ultimate wisdom. Without a doubt, this is a place of great joy and great beauty. Seeking real good is an important part of living wisely. The steps we've outlined can be organized into a larger structure for living wisely. Begin with a foundation of personal responsibility. Seeking real good and living wisely begins with our own responsibility, integrity, and basic competency. This is personal good. Recognize what is real requires clear thinking. Only by thinking clearly can you distinguish what is real from what is an illusion. Seek consistency, learn to recognize nonsense, and dismiss it. We also need to learn what is. Understanding how our universe actually is provides a firm foundation for imagining how it ought to be. This is what is real. With a firm grasp on reality, we can begin to imagine possibilities, what can be, generate new and useful alternatives for living, exercise divergent thinking. It's good to determine what ought to be. Choose alternatives wisely to help create the wonderful world we all want. Exercise convergent thinking, guided by a firm sense of morality and reality. Morality is action. Do good. Act to create the wise world you want. Exercise the social good. With this firm foundation in place, you have the confidence to be good, to enjoy being. Enjoy seeking real good throughout your lives. Progress through these stages of growth towards living wisely. Embrace reality. Know what is real. Face facts and seek true beliefs. Know what is true and why it's true. Advance no falsehoods. Dispel fallacies and dismiss nonsense. Pursue well-being. Know what is good and why it's good. Flourish and prevent misery. Live the golden rule. Respect dignity and preserve human rights worldwide. Enjoy seeking real good throughout your life. Choose to live wisely. Humanists of the world unite. We have nothing to lose but nonsense and misery. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello, there we go, all right. So we're gonna do a little Q&A right now. The way we do this is one at a time. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll try and remember who's who and I'll walk around. If you just be patient, we'll try to get to everyone. It looks like it's about 11:35. We'll go to maybe about noon. So if you could stay to the end as to not disrupt the discussion and distract. Please stay to the very end. If you got to take off, that's fine. We can understand that. You could scoot out right now. So we'll start right here. If anyone has another question, comment, concern, you got one back here.
Yeah. Thank you for your very enticing presentation. But somehow it reminds me of the doctrine of market fundamentalism. It ignores the ambiguities of existence, the ambivalence of human psychology, and the utter lack of control that we have over the reality that surrounds us. So can you please address those three items? Because I didn't see them appearing in any of your charts.
Sure. We're not done. Basically, we're not done. Emotions are real. Dreams are real. That is, people really have dreams. There are many mysteries of the universe we do not understand. This is basically a talk against fundamentalism and easy answers and that sort of thing, okay? It's a call for an ongoing investigation, but for the use of reliable methods in that, okay? To some extent, this is a talk against fake news, okay? If you look at my list of facts, those are very basic things. And I think that those are really not contested on any kind of a firm basis, yet we hear people afraid to assert those. They talk about beliefs and feelings and it's politically incorrect to challenge them and so on. I think we can start there and learn more about it. I'm a scientist. My lovely wife is not, and she teaches me many things that scientists don't know. There is poetry, there is dance, there is music, there is drama, there is research, and all that stuff is out there. But once a belief has been falsified, go with the new information, is kind of where I am. Have I addressed this at all?
Not exactly. For instance, I see a convergence between the religious perspective and the scientific perspective. There is ambiguity in both, and the only difference that I can tell is that one postulates the finding of truth on deductive reasoning,
Right.
and the other postulates on inductive reasoning. Start with a large amount of data,
Right.
and work your way up to some kind of conclusion.
So,
And those two can converge at some point, as we see in quantum physics,
Right.
at the micro level of reality.
So there's a couple things. The Earth really is 4.5 billion years old, okay? And this is my thing about and that's gotten through scientists. We've asked geologists and so on, okay? Once that is well understood, it's essentially delusional to hold to some doctrine that disagrees with that. So that has to be given up from the start, okay? And my talk is not just about science. I'm talking about what is good. I'm talking about flourishing. I give 40 items up there. Beauty is on that list. Learning is on that list. Dreaming is on that list. All these things are good.
there is a very widespread conception among the vast majority of the Earth's population, which can be surmised in just one sentence. Perception is reality. So people ignore the actual data out there, and they feel more comfortable, psychologically speaking, in creating their own realities.
It's
And
true.
we address that.
It's true that there's reality, there's the observation, there's the perception, and there's the beliefs that all those things happen. All those things are true. But if you and I go to the Eiffel Tower, and I say that it's 300 meters tall, and you just feel like it's 400 meters tall, there is a way to resolve that, okay? So it's not a free-for-all. It's not that if I imagine it, if I feel it, I can believe it, and if I believe it, it's true. That's a fallacy.
But does it apply to climate change?
It does, but that's another talk. Do you want to go on?
Thank you. It was a very interesting talk. And I just want to, something I heard, I don't know who said it, but so many people spend a lot of time trying to be happy.
Right.
And happy is very fleeting. And this is where I came from. They said we should try to be good, not happy. And happiness still flows from that, but don't try to be happy. The other thing I want to say is, which I believe as a fact, even though most people would say it was my opinion, but I believe it could probably be said by statistics, that people all over the world, basically people are good. Now, good people do bad things very often, but they're good people. There's probably less than 1% of people that you would really call evil, and most of the time that's due to mental illness, not real people. And I just wanted to throw that out, that I think people are good, and people should be trusted and dignified and treated with respect because people are good.
Okay. So a couple of things. I correspond with a philosopher who says that happiness is for pigs in mud. Aristotle talked about something that I never pronounce right. It's eudaimonia. Maybe you can help me pronounce that. But it's generally translated as gratification. So happiness is kind of like cheap thrills. And there's a deeper gratification that you can get from following the things on the what matters deal. So there's that. With respect to people being good, some are and some aren't. But if a cleric uses his authority to advance a falsehood, is that person being good? I mean, they're self-righteous, they've got all the robes, but I think that's bad. And I'm not sure that that's understood. I do believe, and this is the topic on the dignity slide, you're born with dignity, it's right there. But I think that things can happen. And I'm not clear whether you lose your dignity or just squander it. But there are people who it's harder to love.
But basically, people do bad things like the
Yeah.
cleric, but overall he's probably not a bad person. He probably doesn't beat his wife and hate his children. Basically, he's a good person,
Yeah.
but he does some bad things.
And that's the idea of the born with human dignity. It's there.
Hi. I had two questions. Whenever I see the comments about the inherent worth and dignity, and maybe it relates to this lady's question, I always think, well, shouldn't we be, instead of talking about inherent worth and dignity, shouldn't we be talking about behaviors? And that we honor, I don't know what other word to use for it, we honor good behaviors, but we dishonor bad behaviors.
Right.
So that's kind of one question. My other question is, I loved your globe example, where those two, what's real and what's good, converge. My worry about that is that we're now thinking about what's good. We're trying to evaluate what's good in the same way we're evaluating what's real. And so the example, and there are probably better examples that come to mind, but one example that came to mind is, how do we decide how many children for a family to have? What's good? Should Should it be one child? Should it be three children? How do we decide that? That doesn't seem to be something that we could easily converge.
Might be a matter of controversy.
Exactly. And so what I'm puzzled by on your globe, as much as I love the idea of what's good converging to what's real, is it seems to be more of a cloud in terms of what's good, seems to be more of a cloud, and I think what you call controversy or opinion. And so, whereas what's real can be a much tighter space. So,
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot there. I'll address what I can remember and think to talk about. I'm a grandfather. I have 3 granddaughters. One is 6, one is 3, and one of them is about 7 months old. And you talked about born with good and behave good and all of that. So I can see them at the different ages, okay? I'm convinced they were all born good, okay? Maybe that's just what a grandfather believes. But I believe that they're all born good and that they learn things. And we saw the way the worldview gets in your head. And if you're taught that these things are good, as opposed to jihad is good, you're going to behave differently, okay? So there's an opportunity here, and this is where the worldview and the evidence and the learning and the growing and all that is important. If the adults, the people in this room, can begin agreeing that this is kind of an idea of good and pass it on, then that's helpful.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Don't we know that at least 1 or 2% of human brains are born as sociopaths?
Yeah, there is that. There is that. So, my comments bear on what I call competent adults, okay? There are people that have mental illnesses, various challenges, and we need to think compassionately how to deal with those people. It's best not to elect them president and that sort of thing. But I kind of put them a little bit outside here, and I'm hoping that thoughtful, compassionate people will think how to deal with them. Your second comment on something like how many people should you have. I have a course called Limits to Growth. We have 2 children. But it's a matter of controversy. And you don't just read a Bible verse to get the answer at that, okay? I have an essay I wrote called Earth at 1 billion. I was once asked what would be the ideal population for Earth, and I said it should be 1 billion, and I wrote a whole essay on that. But it's a matter of controversy, and that needs to be debated, not by reciting scriptures or anything like that, but by going back to ask the philosopher. I think I dropped one of your questions, but maybe we'll move on. Sir.
This is Archie. I start out each semester with my students on the very first day. I give them the definition of truth, and I just want to know how badly I'm corrupting these kids from your point of view. But I tell them that truth is that which is boldly asserted and plausibly maintained.
Okay.
And I keep that concept through the whole semester to get them to think.
Okay, so on that, the traditional definition of knowledge is justified true belief. And philosophers have debated that for 2,500 years and come up with problems with it. Recently, about 20 years ago, some philosophers came up with what's called the intellectual virtues, and that led to my slide here on seeking true beliefs. And Linda Zagzebski, who's one of the leading philosophers on this, came up with a new definition of knowledge. What her definition is that knowledge is a belief that a person would come to if they were conscientiously applying the intellectual virtues. That is, knowledge is basically the best we can come up with people who are doing their best to seek knowledge, which is an interesting thing. A short definition of truth that I use is correspondence with reality. And I think that that's fairly clear and fairly robust. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, mine. See, mine would be totally consistent.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be at lunch.
This may be a little bit far afield, but I'm just wondering whether you think, like AI and the singularity would hasten the convergence of those 2 points, because it would eliminate the issue of the psychological
Right.
problems, and obviously a computer can process and come, you know, if it's programmed correctly, come to what's actually
Happening, yeah.
happening. I'm just, you know, is that the next step?
So a couple things. Ron gave us an excellent point on AI, so so we have that. But we're already coding, we are already embedding moral decisions into AI devices. And I can prove this to you. Don't do this experiment. But take a self-driving car, and these are available today. Set it down the highway, and put a van here, a child here, and a priest there. And what does the car do? It does something today. I don't actually know what it does, and it's kind of a gruesome experiment. And I do not know whether the companies that have self-driving cars have a chief ethics officer in charge of these kinds of things. But we're already getting there. And I think that what AI can do is sharpen up some of the, well, how are we going to make a decision like that? What are our values here? And it can kind of sharpen up that thinking. There are people, the guy that did the Singularity University and some others that are just afraid when we get to the singularity they're going to go on out. When Ron gave his talk, I said, how do you avoid that? And he said, think about it before it happens, is his answer. So it can happen.
I guess just a comment to me, or maybe if you can reflect or continue. I like very much, you know, the charts that you put up in terms of cross-sectioning the good and no falsehood or reality. I was thinking back about the history of our history of humanity, and how sometimes there were these points in history where the leaders or humans or those in uprising had to make choices, you know, and the choices made these things real at some point. I mean, in particular, for example, I have the example of the French Revolution and their decision to abolish slavery, you know, which had, of course, a huge impact in the world, and especially on an island like Saint-Domingue, which became Haiti, and how it actually changed and made real a country that could live next to, you know, worlds and huge areas of really slavery government, you know, people that, you know, government. So my point is that I love this because, yeah, we can look at what's real, but then we can dream and we can make, you know, things real, and, you know, by actually more knowledge. And we have a choice as humanists to make like you said there, the good choices and move forward, you know, and how do we do that?
Good. Let me mention that we're on the threshold of a transition from tribal thinking to global thinking. There's a lot of books on this, but an outstanding one is called Moral Tribes. If we go back 100,000 years, people lived in tribes, and the decisions they made influenced the people that they could see, the people that they were related to, and so on. And we evolved so that our instincts have a morality in that sense. But we're now in a global community, and we have an obligation to adopt a global perspective. You saw the list of grand challenges. Those are adopted from a global perspective. If I were to ask you, what are the issues around water? From a local perspective, it's, gee, you know, why does he buy water in water bottles? If you do it from a national perspective, it's, gee, we have to worry about the water in Flint, Michigan. But if you look at water from a global perspective, there's 750 million people who do not have access to clean, fresh drinking water. So you need to make your decisions of what is good based on a global perspective. That requires an immense amount of information that may be difficult to collect. It requires systems thinking, what's going to happen if I change this, what's going to happen over there. And it requires that we use our head very often over our heart because of our intuitions being on a tribal basis. So I hope that addresses some of your question.
Can we go back to the slide that has the mother and child?
Yes.
So I want to state a disagreement that I had. The trivialization of happiness. You know, we're saying that this is good, and we're talking about human beings on planet Earth. And you know, if you look at the facial expressions of the mother, one of them is suffering. If you look at the can imagine what the child is thinking, it's probably being tormented. And we look at the slide on the right, and we imagine what joy that mother is experiencing in that child. You know, that child is not hungry, that child is not cold, they're surrounded by water. The child is comforted by her mother. Yeah? The other child probably can't find comfort. I think these pains, and I think these pleasures, I would say the lady on the right is not happy. I mean, the lady on the left is not happy.
Which one, the beach or the draft?
And in this case, happiness matches, you know, what we're calling an evil. And on the right, happiness, pleasant emotions and feelings and expectations are matching what we're calling good. So I think a lot of times, the definition of what is good sometimes corresponds to what is virtuous, or what's socially accepted, or what everybody else considered to be acceptable. But I think sometimes what's good corresponds to what is pleasant, what brings happiness. And I think that we can agree that if all humans, or for a large fraction of the humans were happy, we would say that was good. And if a large fraction of humanity was suffering and in pain, we would say that was bad. Because there's no God who's telling us this is good and this is what's bad. We are the ultimate judge. What is good and bad. We can all agree, we can even look at each other's faces and find these things. That's my first issue. If you want to respond to that one before I switch to the other two, then.
I already talked about the distinction between anything goes happiness and gratification and all of that, and I think that's what you're elaborating. So we'll go on to the second one, okay. And again, I'll be at lunch.
Okay. If we go to about, I think it was around slide 7. I'm not exactly sure what slide it is. And I mostly agree with your talk. You know, I think it was a great talk. I just think the trivialization of happiness
that's slide 7.
Is a mistake. Can you go just search around a little bit? I'm looking for a circular one.
A circular one.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it had multiple layers.
Well, let's see. How about that one? How about that one? You can pick from the right here.
No, I don't even want to waste a lot of time on this. Okay. All right, let's talk about human rights.
Okay.
Let's talk about human rights. I don't even disagree with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I read it. I love it. It fits me. I'm not going to argue that it's wrong. But, you know, here we are. You know, we're born and we're going to die. And we have to make the best of what we have all of our lives. And a lot of people find themselves living in countries where those human rights are not practiced.
Correct.
Or practiced to a greater or lesser extent and so on. And yet, these people want to make the most of their lives. And we can't change the whole world, so a lot of times we can spend a lot of time, we can spend a lot of our fraction of our lives trying to convert everybody to adopt the human rights. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend some time, but a lot of times, even after 5 or 10 or 15 years of thinking about how to improve the goodness, the greater good for humanity, we come to realize, wow, I've made such little progress. Perhaps I should just focus more on my individual happiness, the happiness of my friends and my family and community, and, you know, let it slide. The further and further it goes for me because I'm just not effective at communicating with people, and I don't want to make myself miserable. And you go from country to country, and each country has its own different ways of practicing life. What would I do if I was making my living in a country where women were less respected, where, let's say I was in some bad Muslim country and so on. we still have to find a way, and I'm going to say this, to live good or to live happiness, because our misery is only going to make everything worse. So once again, I just want to, I'm very much against this trivialization of, I think when people are flourishing, they are happier.
Okay, thank you. I'll be like,
Yeah, go to Ron.
go to Ron.
Okay, this is for you guys. I noticed during the talk that some people were taking pictures. You don't have to do that. This presentation is going to be on the internet in its complete thing, questions and answers, the whole deal. Also, I will put links in wherever they're available on the slides to take you to the website where that slide came
Thank you,
from.
that's good.
And one final note, taking flash pictures of slides, that doesn't work anyway.
Thank you for that real information. It was very good.
I liked, thank you for the talk, it was great. Like I said earlier, I'm less of a thinker than a doer, but you know, I subscribe to our beliefs completely wholly, and I often run into friends and families and colleagues who, you know, you start to have a conversation about, you know, our belief system, and it may run down the branch of, oh, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious, or I'm a Buddhist, or you know, I practice Reiki, or you know, acupuncture, or something like some sort of pseudoscience, you know, and I have a hard time, maybe because I'm not like wholly intellectual about all of this, to have a proper argument or discussion about that without me just saying, oh, you know, you're wrong, and then. What's that? Right, and but it was a helpful tool for me to think about. Be like, oh, well, they're being good, but they're also extending falsehoods, you know.
That's correct.
And so it kind of helped me kind of put into perspective what my mind couldn't really, you know, argue with or describe or have a discussion with someone. But now I can see that they are trying to be good people and practicing good practices and being, you know, practicing the golden rule, but they're also promoting falsehoods.
Correct.
So that was
So that's it. Advance no falsehoods, that's your standard. Walk around with that and you'll lose a lot of friends.
Well, Ron, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming today. I happen to have driven, I used to be a limo driver, Robert Wilson.
I know him, yes. Nobel Prize winner.
That's exactly right. Yes. Hold on. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I came here, this is the very first time I'm here. I was very, I didn't know what to expect, okay? I didn't expect to see it. Look, Ron, or I'm sorry, Lee. This is the most exciting topic in the world, but to try to explain it with slides and going to this thing and leading to this, to that, makes it so boring. I'm sorry. Okay? We have to find a way to accelerate the acceptance that science leads to the truth and not dividing.
Right.
Recently, I've been going to the College Flea Market. There are several vendors there that I like. They're nice people, but they're constantly telling me I'm going to hell. Okay? I don't want to hear that. We have to somehow accelerate our efforts to change the educational system in the United States, because we fall far short of what other countries in the world do. You know, you hear the argument from them that if you don't believe in God, you're an evil person, or that, you know, it leads to, you know, there's no moral compass. But yet,
I gave you some.
From what I've seen from all the other people that I've seen on the internet recently, results indicate that the countries that are least religious have the less crime, or at least amount of crime.
Correct.
The people who have more crime are people like the United States, rank something like 19th or something like that in education. This is an intolerable situation for the richest countries in the world. We have to find a way to somehow arrest, and well, this sounds a little bit, you know, radical, but these televangelists who go around, they're hypocrites. They get caught in hotel rooms, sleeping with kids, okay? And, you know, and yet they propound that this is, you know what I'm saying? It's just so hypocritical. And yet these religious people who buy into this, they're so gullible. We have to find a way to teach them how to critically think. That, to me, is what the real problem is. The school systems in America, and also the people. I mean, there's 100 million people in the United States that expect the rapture to come and happen any day. The Bible is complete. You know, and I think this one of those, I mean, I came from a very religious family. I had 2 aunts that were nuns. They used to come over to the house daily and tell me how I gotta pray and how I gotta worship Jesus. I mean, I've seen some great comedians recently, okay? They were on one of them showed a clip where they had a poster of Jesus, and he said, "Love me or go to hell." No, he said, "Obey me. Obey my word, or you're going to go straight to hell forever," you know? And then it's love God. Was at the end of it. In other words, oh, have lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna go to lunch, folks. You're welcome to join me. I'm sorry, I threw away a lot of it.
Yeah, something Tim said earlier triggered the thought. I think that his comment ended up with, "That's controversial."
Right.
And it seems to me a lot of it kind of followed a number of the other comments and questions. So I have a comment. My question is, can you comment on my comment?
Sure.
And my comment is, I think a lot of the things that are controversial are really due to the fact that we human beings are competing at every level, all the time, every day. And we still haven't worked out completely the rules of competition. Now, you've got 3 grandchildren. I'm sure they compete for the attention of their parents. I'm sure the parents compete with each other for some of the resources that they have as a family. We compete as families. We compete as communities. We compete as countries. Everywhere we're competing. And I think that's the source of a lot of the controversial things that have to do with morality and what's right and what's good. Comment.
Yeah, that is correct. Searching for a fundamental basis for morality is difficult. I mentioned the book, Moral Tribes. He basically looks at something he calls deep pragmatism as a basis for it. But it's basically maximizing well-being worldwide. That's a fairly easy statement. If you compete to be the best doing that, that's one thing. But if you want to knock the other guy off so he doesn't do it, that's quite another. And again, our instincts are difficult. There's a course called Doing Good, which is helpful. There's a course called Assessing Human Rights, which gets to this gentleman's comments that is out there. I do not have the answers, but continuing to advance falsehoods is not the way to go. And looking at ancient scriptures for moral guidance is not the way to go. I'm suggesting some things here. It's ongoing work.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question?
So I have 2 questions.
Okay.
You can choose to answer if you want. What's the difference between truth and true beliefs? I went into a trance when you were explaining that, so I missed it.
Okay.
And then the second one is, can we extend our compassion to animals, even though I eat animals myself, but I have friends who are like vegan.
Yeah, okay. So the first one, what's the difference between truth and true beliefs? I use the phrase true beliefs as a hedge. Largely because I understand that philosophers have dismissed the concept of certainty. So if certainty is out the window, it's kind of hard to do. But my short definition of truth is correspondence with reality. A true belief is a belief that you hold that corresponds with reality. So they're pretty close. Okay, belief is what I hold to be true. So there's that. Your second comment was animals. Yes. Somewhere in here, I say that what matters is human experience. And I have in parentheses, but I didn't say it. It's basically sentient experience is probably what matters. Sentient experience means if there's a being, perhaps an animal, what do you like? chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, Dick has some self-concept. There is a cogent argument that they deserve our sympathies. And I think that that's probably correct. I'm not there either. But Peter Singer talks about this topic in some depth. But if I have a choice between saving an animal and saving a person, I think that's a clear choice. And then considering the number of people that die every day with needless suffering, let's kind of start there is the way I think about it. It's a matter of priorities.
Great. All right. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause. Thanks a lot. Again.